everyone, and welcome back to the 5th Annual Austrian World Summit. Did everybody get a bite to eat? Did you all meet some interesting people? Did you all ponder what Greta Thunberg advised us to ponder? We are going to kick things off. Again, we need to be prompt because we have someone very important waiting to speak to us. He is the voice on the U.S. climate ambition. It's John Kerry, who's going to be joining us live in just a moment. But right now, let's take a look back at something that's absolutely worth celebrating, and that is the United States rejoining the Paris Agreement.
It doesn't matter that Donald Trump backed out of the Paris Agreement because the private sector didn't drop out, the public sector didn't drop out, universities didn't drop out, scientists didn't drop out, engineers didn't drop out, no one dropped out. Donald Trump pulled Donald Trump out of the Paris Agreement.
Act with urgency, this is a climate emergency! Act with urgency, this is a... The earth is dying, stop denying, the earth is dying. Our air! Our climate! Our
We must do what the science demands.
The commitment I made that we're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord as of today.
The critical role in keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius as the limit of the warming that we face. And because we know that we are already at 1.2 degrees, we have a very small margin to play with.
No nation can solve this crisis on our own, as I know you all fully understand. All of us, particularly those of us who represent the world's largest economies, we have to step up. Time is short, but I believe we can do this. And I believe that we will do this.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my very good friend, Secretary of the State and environmental expert, and someone that is really passionate about this subject, John Kerry. John.
Hey, Arnold. Nice to be with you. Glad to be with you. You want me just to say a few words and then we talk?
Go ahead, John. Give you the remarks, and then I will have a follow-up question, and I will grill you.
Grilled by Arnold. It's a privilege.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Arnold. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be with you, and thank you for your leadership, not just now with the World Summit, but you did an amazing amount in California. You were one of the leaders in the very beginning on this, and you did so in a party, I regret to say, that has made it near criminal, certainly politically, to be embracing this issue. It's quite remarkable that in the United States of America, we have an entire major party that has yet to really step up and join us in this fight. But that said, President Biden is deeply committed to this, as you saw, not just with the signing of the agreement, but he has issued a number of executive orders. He has adopted a very ambitious goal for our National Determined Contribution, NDC, which we announced at the summit that he hosted in April. And that is a 50 to 52% reduction over the course of the next 10 years. And I know all of you have noticed, by the way, not just that, but he's issued instructions that this is an all-of-government effort. And we have a task force that meets and that brings together every agency of our government to now make determinations about how we move forward. In addition, the president is going to be issuing an executive order regarding disclosure, financial disclosure. So that very large financial institutions are now going to have to publicly account for whatever risk is involved in the investments that they're making, looking out 10, 20, 30 years and so forth. And that will have financial fiduciary responsibility. But let me phrase this. I've been involved in this issue since the 1980s, and I was there when Jim Hansen testified that climate was here, the climate change was here as a challenge. And then in 1992, Al Gore, a group of us senators, myself, we went down to Rio. We took part in the very first COP, the Conference of the Parties. And I have been to so many in between and had the privilege of leading our negotiations in Paris. And in Paris, for the first time, 196 countries came together and said, we are going to do our best to hold the Earth's temperature increase to well below 2 degrees centigrade, and if possible, 1.5 degrees. What has happened in the ensuing years is that scientists are now warning us, you're not getting the job done. And they are telling us, and they told us 2 years ago in 2018, 3 years ago now, that we had 12 years within which to make the decisions and implement them to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Regrettably, no country in the world is really where we ought to be. There may be a handful that are nearing alignment with the Paris Agreement, but most countries, and most ominously, the 20 largest emitting countries, the 20 largest economies in the world that we brought together at the Washington Summit, account for about 80% of all emissions on the planet. The problem is about half of those large economies have not yet seized this issue and made the determinations necessary for all of us to be able to win this battle. So at the summit that President Biden hosted, 55% of global GDP committed to try to achieve the 1.5 degrees. More importantly, they put on the table specific plans for reductions between 2020 and 2030 that keep us on that path to hold the 1.5 degrees. But obviously, if 55% said yes, you got 45% that are on the sidelines, not yet committed to do that. And the problem with that is very, very simple. You hear a lot of people today embracing net zero by 2050. And it's great. We're happy to have people say net zero by 2050. But unaccompanied by any plan whatsoever, not only for how they do the next 30 years to get to 2050, but unaccompanied by any plan for what they're going to do to be able to get there by reducing sufficiently between 2020 and 2030, it becomes an insult almost, a joke to what we're trying to achieve. You hear politicians say that this issue is existential. And believe me, for some people on the planet today, it is existential. There are people who have died in the last days of the extreme heat in various parts of our country and other countries. But the problem is that we're seeing the feedback loops of Mother Nature telling us everywhere a reduced amount of glacier. You see that in Austria. You see it in the Himalayas. You see it in North America, in the Alps. The reduced amount of ice is having a profound impact on the availability of fresh water through the melt that usually takes place every spring and summer, and huge rivers around which billions of people have centered their lives, whether it's the Ganges or the Yellow River or the Yangtze River or the Mekong River, are seeing reductions in the availability of water. Water for us in the United States now, in California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, is going to be very probably almost certainly rationed through the course of this year. It's already, even before the drought, a major problem just in terms of development. So we're not close anywhere to really living sustainably. And the problem with the challenge of saying something is existential and you can see and know that it is, and then we're not responding as if it is existential. And on an international global basis, we are not responding as if it is genuinely existential. If we did respond accordingly, you would spend what we need to, We would be accelerating the research and development and the innovation that we need for battery storage, for other kinds of storage, for direct air carbon capture, for more efficient and more capable, 100% certain actual carbon capture, for the new technologies of green hydrogen or other available sources, biofuels, et cetera. These are solutions. But if you're not investing in them sufficiently and not deploying them sufficiently, they're not. And that's unfortunately where we are today. You hear people talk about building back better after COVID, but we're not. It's business as usual. Massive commitments to coal-fired power plants in certain parts of the world. Now, we are the number 2 emitter in the world. The United States has gone from about 15% of all emissions. We're now around 11 or 12%. China is 28% and rising. And then you have India and Russia and Brazil and Mexico and South Africa and a group of countries that I regret to say have yet to make the transition away from coal into renewables, other alternatives, which we need to do at a much faster pace. Just to give you an idea of what that faster pace means. In order to meet the goal of 1.5 degrees and hold it alive over the course of the next 10 years, we need to deploy the world's largest solar field every day for 10 years. Every day. And I got news for you. We probably couldn't even deploy one of the world's largest solar fields over the course of the next 6 months or a year. So we're clearly, despite all the rhetoric, we've got an enormous journey yet to make. The IEA, the International Energy Administration, just came out with a report recently saying that we have to now put on super steroids the ability to be able to deploy new innovation. We need to put on super steroids the ability to be able to discover and do the research and development that brings you that new innovation. And finally, no more new fossil fuel projects at a time where we need to be clearly moving to renewable, alternative, sustainable energy. And so this is you can't gild the lily here. This is the greatest challenge that we have ever faced. We've had wars through centuries. Usually when a country goes to war, you spend what you need to spend, you do what you need to have to do, and you go out to win. Despite the fact that this is like an asteroid coming at the planet, only it's not going to have that one giant impact. It's going to have this drawn out, continual growing impact of a whole bunch of different things. 90% of the heat that we are absorbing today, it goes into the ocean. And we are seeing vast changes in the chemistry of the ocean. I just visited the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute 2 days ago. And we saw very clearly what they're measuring now in terms of the change of the acidity of the ocean, the actual warming trend of the ocean, totally visible, 100% science, 100% certain. And now we see coral reefs, which are spawning grounds for fisheries, dying. We just saw in Australia the National Historic designation of the Great Barrier Reef changed to the outrage of many Australians. But in fact, it's dead, it's dying. And so the evidence is all around us. And as human beings, what we need to do is stop and take a look and recognize that this is a crisis that does not have to bring doom and gloom. It does not have to bring us these massive changes. Scientists tell us we still have time over the course of these next 10 years, this decade. 2020 to 2030 is the critical decade. And if we do what we know we can do, which means, frankly, buying into the largest market in the world, the largest market the world's ever known, energy market. Energy is the real decider about what we do with respect to climate. And if we adopt better energy policy, and if we innovate and move, there are millions of jobs to be created. There is greater wealth to be created than we've created in the technology boom to date. and we will wind up with a healthier, better a planet where there's less cancer, less particulates in the air, cleaner air, less pollution, and it is pollution, folks. And we begin to really build the future that young people, Greta Thunberg and so many others, are so passionately calling adults to account for. It's time for adults to behave like adults, get the job done.
Well, thank you very much, John. I just wanted to ask you a follow-up question. Let's give him a good hand for this great wisdom. Thank you very much for your time, and I don't want to abuse the time that you're giving us here, but I do have a follow-up question or two, if you don't mind.
Happy to be with you.
One of them is, as you know, Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So now my question is, what do you think needs to be done differently? I was recommending, for instance, today, let's do our approach with our communication differently. Let's talk more about what you talked about, pollution, rather than just climate change. And there's many different ways of looking at it. For instance, when you go to COP26, we all know that these COP negotiations are very good, but they can't really quite close the deal. Why? Because those leaders go home and then they have to pass what they've promised through their legislators. And then sometimes, as you know, Biden wants to do certain aggressive things in America, but he can't get it past the legislators, the lawmakers in Washington. So that's what makes it very difficult, the whole thing. So what is your idea of what we can do differently?
Well, I think we have to treat it differently, Arnold. As I just said, if you don't begin to address it, for instance, I mean, you know, when you're faced with a crisis, you bring everybody to the table. I think we have to bring the planet to the table at this point through the United Nations. We have a major meeting in New York in September. President Biden has announced we will have another meeting, a follow-up meeting. He announced it when we held the first summit, and we will bring those 20 countries together. We will ask them to come into the room and guarantee that we provide the $100 billion that was promised in Paris and has never been put together for less developed countries to be able to make the transition. We're not asking, you know, I hear some countries, some big countries with a lot of money and a lot of power say, well, wait a minute, you guys had 150 years to develop and you made this mistake from the beginning. We deserve some carbon space. We deserve to be able to go a little further because we have to be able to catch up. Well, that's just bunk. That is not accurate. We're not asking people to not grow. We're asking them to grow smart, to grow differently. It's what you just said about Einstein. Don't do the same thing all over again. Right now, it's as if we've signed a mutual suicide pact. And we're all just cruising along to a world where there will be tens of millions of refugees, where food production will be interrupted. And if Europe thinks that the politics of Europe were disturbed by the refugees coming out of Syria and Turkey, where you know, you'd see the dial turned and they'd be pushed out and they'd go into Germany and other countries, Austria, elsewhere, I mean, that really changed politics. Think what happens when the Horn of Africa is unlivable, when the Middle East is uninhabitable. We have 130 degrees today in some of those communities, going up. And the scientists are only predicting that it will go up. Human beings can't live in that. So, you know, there'll be conflict over water, conflict over resources. And people will be banging on the door of Europe where it is cooler and there's more, farmland and trees and capacity to live and water. And then where do we go? So I think we have to have leaders who are looking around the corner and looking down the road, Arnold, and the key countries have got to come together. If the United States, look, for instance, the 55% of the world that came together to commit to 1.5 represents Europe, the UK, Canada, the US, Japan, and we hope to add Indonesia, Korea, a few other countries to that. So what is the other percentage going to do? China is 28% of all the world's emissions. They brought about 200 gigawatts of coal-fired power online the last few years, and they have another 100 gigawatts of coal-fired power that's about to come online. We just can't do that, because if that happens, it kills 1.5 degrees. It kills the ability to have net zero by 2050. So all nations have to come to the table. That's what we have to do differently. If we all put our minds to this could be the greatest economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution, and we can literally create a safer, more fair world in which we are working together to solve those problems. This is the greatest test we've ever faced, Arnold, and I really applaud you and appreciate the fact that you're putting it front and center at your conference.
Well, thank you very much, John. This was really a terrific answer. It gives us a lot of new ways of looking at it. And there's one more question. This is going to be a really tough one. Where are you right now? Are you at the White House?
No, I'm in Boston. I'm in my home in Boston.
Oh, because it's such a mess in the background. I mean, this place needs to be cleaned up a little bit. I mean, do you want me to come there next weekend and to clean it up a little bit? Or what do you want me to do?
You just throw it out.
Anyway, thank you so much, John.
I welcome your signal. You're right. It is a mess, and that's because I haven't had time to clean it up.
Don't worry about it. We clean it up together. The Republican and the Democrat together, we can do anything. Trust me, okay? Thank you so much for your time. Give him a big hand. Thank you, and I see you next year in person here.
Yes, sir. I'll be there.